the end of the day, if you have someone that you love and care about that deals with depression, has a diagnosis of depression, sometimes they're just going to be depressed. That is just the nature of the beast. Hi there, Shannon here with Genesis Balance. If you're new to my channel, I want to say welcome. And if you've been here before, I want to say welcome back. Today's video is about how to love someone with depression. And these tips that I'll be giving you will be beneficial whether it is a romantic relationship that you're in, or it's a platonic friendship, parent, sibling, child. No matter who the person is that's suffering from the depression, these tips are going to help you love them a little bit better. So if this is something that you feel like will be beneficial to you, stay tuned, because I think these tips are going to help you live your best life. So when it comes to loving someone with depression, it can be very stressful and very difficult for the person that is on the other side of the depression, especially if that person doesn't have a clear concept of or grasp of what depression actually is for themselves. If they haven't experienced it, then there's just really, it's very difficult for them to kind of wrap their mind around what their loved one is going through. So step number one is to understand that it is an illness and it is not something that they can control. Oftentimes you'll hear people that will make comments such as, oh, you just need to smile more, or just snap out of it, or, just pick yourself up and get over it. Well, what I'll say to that is, and I don't remember what organization it was, but I remember decades ago, I once saw a billboard that was talking about depression, and it said, you wouldn't tell someone with cancer to just get over it. And that kind of always stuck with me in kind of trying to explain what depression is to people who have never dealt with depression in their own personal life. Just like you wouldn't tell someone to just get over having cancer and pick yourself up and cure yourself, you shouldn't really tell someone with depression to do that either, because it is not something they can control. If you don't really believe it, then just think for a second from this perspective. Depression feels really, really bad, like horrible, like really, really crappy. It is a horrible feeling to be depressed, to constantly be depressed. If it were possible for someone to kind of just pull themselves out of it, they would. But the simple fact that they continue to be depressed lets you know that it's not something that they can control, because trust me, no one wants to feel depressed. So if someone you love has depression, just understand that it really is an illness, and it's not something that they can just snap out of, and it's not something that they have control over to that extent. The next thing that will help you love someone with depression a little bit better is to understand that sometimes there's no trigger. So a lot of times, especially when I'm working with couples and I have one half of the couple that is dealing with depression and the other partner does not have depression, does not deal with depression, the other partner sometimes just doesn't understand why their spouse is depressed. And they'll say things like, well, nothing happened. There's no reason for them to be depressed. I don't understand why you're depressed. Kind of, well, tell me what went wrong and I'll fix it, and then you won't be depressed. But what people don't necessarily understand is that there is not always a specific trigger, a specific physical trigger to depression. And that can make it very, very difficult for the person that, cares about you or loves you, when they just want to fix it and make it right, but there's no actual situation. There's no indicator as to why they are feeling depressed. So just keep in mind that saying comments like, well, you have no reason to be depressed, nothing has happened to make you depressed, that's not helpful, because at the end of the day, when you suffer from depression, there are two different forms of depression, and sometimes they happen at the same time. So in the one case of depression, something happens that triggers a person, and that event makes them feel depressed. So if someone, for instance, had, let's say someone had something stolen from them and then they felt depressed, or someone got in a car accident and then they felt depressed. That is kind of a trigger-based depression. That is one type of depression. The other type of depression that people deal with is a chemical imbalance. There is a chemical imbalance of the feel-good chemicals that elevate our mood. And when we don't have enough of those chemicals in our body at any given time, it makes you feel depressed. That is when you start to get the symptoms of depression. So sometimes the thing that triggered their depressive episode is not something that you can see. It's not something you can touch. It's not something that they can necessarily vocalize. So a lot of times they may just say, I don't know why I feel depressed. I just am depressed. It's just one of those days. I just don't feel good. I don't feel like myself. And that's why, because there's not always a trigger to the depressive episode. Not something that you can see, not something that you can necessarily identify. So in those cases, that is what we call a chemical imbalance, and that is what has induced the depressive episode. So sometimes there's just no trigger. The third thing is, it's not you, it's me. Don't take it personal. So going back to that concept that sometimes there's no visible trigger. When you're in a relationship, even if it's not a romantic relationship, but when you have a relationship with someone that suffers from depression, it can sometimes feel like you are the cause of them not being happy or feeling depressed, because you're the person that is there with them while they're going through this depression. And as I mentioned in the last point, there's not always a trigger to point to. We as humans, we want to know the why. We want to know what is the cause, what is the reason, so that I can fix it. Well, if there's not an actual cause or reason that I can point to, my mind automatically just goes to, oh, well, then it must be me. I must be doing something wrong. You must be unhappy with me because I'm the only person here and you're depressed, and there's nothing else, no other cause, no other situation that could have caused your depression. So it must be me. But that is not the case. That's a very common misconception, especially in romantic relationships, that one partner that is dealing with depression is depressed because of something that the other partner did, because they are not happy within the relationship. That may or may not be the case, but if you don't feel like there is something that you did, then it's probably not you. You're probably not the trigger. That kind of goes back to that chemical imbalance trigger. That chemical imbalance is what's causing the depression. So even if the person that you care about seems to be taking things out on you, because irritability is a symptom of depression, it's not you. That is, you don't necessarily deserve the you don't necessarily deserve their irritability to be directed at you. But if you're the person that's there, then you may be the person that gets some of that irritability. But just know that it's really not you that they're upset with or irritated with. It's just a symptom of the depression. So the fourth point that I feel is very, very important to point out is you cannot cure them with your relationship. And this is very important with any relationship, but especially romantic relationships. There is often a misconception that if someone is happy within their relationship with a person, when we're talking romantic now, if they're happy within that relationship, then there is no more depression. There should be no need for that person to ever be sad ever again, because they are in a happy relationship and they have this wonderful partner, and their partner is great to them and loves them so much. And it's almost as though the partner feels as though they should be able to love away the depression. And unfortunately, that is just not how it works. Again, sometimes it's a trigger, sometimes it's a chemical imbalance. But at the end of the day, if you have someone that you love and care about that deals with depression, has a diagnosis of depression, sometimes they're just going to be depressed. That is just the nature of the beast. And no matter what you do, you cannot love them out of their depression. You cannot do there's nothing that you can do relationship wise that is going to cure them of their depression. And it's really not fair to essentially put that pressure on them to ask them to suddenly be better because they're with you. Because now it becomes a situation where it almost feels like, well, if you loved me as much as I loved you, there's no way you could be depressed anymore. And that's just not the case. So just remember, you can't cure them with a happy relationship. There are things that we can do to treat depression. There are therapies, there are medications, there are plenty of coping skills, but just being in a loving, caring relationship in and of itself is not always going to be enough to just make the depression go away, to make them stop having depressive episodes. Because again, it's often a chemical imbalance, and love can do, wonderful things, but the love of another person is just not going to cure a chemical imbalance. And then finally, the fifth and final tip that I have on loving someone with depression is take any, and I do mean any and every, suicide threat seriously. If you have a loving relationship with this person and they're expressing to you that they may be suicidal, you notice that they're seeming more and more hopeless. Maybe they're doing things like they're giving away all of their possessions, things that they value. They're saying things like the world would be better off without me, or they blatantly say, you know what, I just wish I would never wake up again. I don't want to be here. Things like that. Always, always, always take that seriously. If you love this person and they're saying these things to you, that should be alarming, and that should be a red flag for you. You don't want to be in a situation where someone that you love and care about basically reached out to you for help, a cry for help, and you didn't take it seriously because of maybe there's a past history of you feeling like they cry wolf all the time, or that's just something that they say when they start to feel down and depressed. That is something that always needs to be addressed. It always needs to be addressed. It always needs to be taken seriously, no matter what the situation is. Because when someone is dealing with depression, like I said, with that chemical imbalance, we don't know how out of balance they are at the time. And while they may not be someone that would ever attempt suicide on a normal, regular day, if there's a combination of a chemical imbalance and they were triggered at that time, we don't know what may happen. So just make sure that you're taking any and every threat of suicide seriously. So those were 5 tips on how to love someone with depression. 1, understand it's an illness and not something that they can control. 2, realizing that sometimes there is no trigger. It is a chemical imbalance. I don't know how many times I've said that in this video, but I really want to drive that home, that sometimes there is no trigger that you can pinpoint. It's just something that's going haywire inside of their body. 3, it's not you, it's me. Don't take it personal. If the person that you care about is kind of lashing out at you or being irritable toward you, sometimes that really is just a symptom of the depression. And again, it's very hard for them to manage those symptoms. Number four, you can't cure them by being in the relationship with them. No matter how happy you are together, no matter how great of a son or daughter you are, no matter how great of a parent or a kid you are, your relationship in and of itself is never going to be enough to just cure them of their depression. And the fact that it doesn't cure them of their depression does not mean they don't love you. That is not the case. And then number five, take any and all suicide threats seriously, because we just don't ever know when something is going to be the final straw. So always, always, always take any suicide threat seriously. So there you have it, the 5 ways that you can love someone with depression a little bit better. If you found this content helpful, please click that thumbs up below. And if you are new here and have not yet subscribed, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell for notifications, because as I always say, it's my goal to provide you with lots of content that's going to help you live your best life.